In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Thanks, Lisa. During the pandemic, children's author Veeda Bybee turned her family's love of Broadway musicals into a creative culinary adventure. The result? A few of my favorite things. A cookbook featuring recipes like Von Trapp schnitzel with noodles from The Sound of Music, Violet's blueberry hand pies from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and One Last Time honey hoe cakes from Hamilton. Launching January 7th from Shadow Mountain, this one-of-a-kind cookbook, complete with a bonus recipe inspired by Wicked. A few of my favorite things arrives just in time for the new Broadway season. Veeda, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Give us a deeper dive into your motivations for writing the book.
It didn't start out as a cookbook, which is the really interesting thing. It was a pandemic project, and I know many of us had those kind of projects. And I think it was a really special time in a way where we had time to do things that just really spoke to our hearts. And one of the things for me and my family was to, be together. And we were watching, being in our home, we were watching a lot of movies, and we started to watch in July, Hamilton came out. And this musical has been in my ear for years. Like, my children have been listening to it for ever since it came out, but we've never seen the play before or the musical. So that we were going to make it a moment, that July, we were going to all sit down and watch the musical together. And before then, we weren't really a family that watched a lot of musicals, but it was really transformative. We were already familiar with the music, but watching Hamilton together and just seeing the stage production, 3 hours went by really quickly. And I decided to make it a goal of ours. I'm really good at making long-term goals, for a year. There's something magical about a year for me. So I thought, I'm going to make this a goal to watch a musical with a family. We call it Family Musical Fridays, because we really were just social distancing and not doing a lot of things. We were going to do that as long as we could. And then I would make a recipe just to make it an event to cook along with the musical. And so, we started doing that, and I didn't start sharing that online until maybe the third one. I wanted to make sure it stuck. But after we did, I just got a lot of really positive feedback from my friends and from people I didn't know, just thinking this is such a fun thing to do. And they wanted to know what musical we're watching next or what I'm going to make. So it became this way to connect with people during the pandemic, but also to really be there with my family. And so that was kind of a fun way to have this project. And so it didn't start as a cookbook, but it started as this project. And then when I was in talks with my publisher, I was trying to pitch them. I'm a children's book author. And so I was pitching to them this project for kids, but they're asking me if I happen to like food or cook. And I said, oh, actually, I do. I had a food blog years ago, but I also just spent, the past couple of years, a couple of years ago during the pandemic, I spent making recipes for musicals, and they were actually very interested in that idea. So that's how it came about.
And how did you choose which musicals to feature in the cookbook?
Yes, it's a really good question. I want, since we were doing it during the pandemic, I wanted it to be something that was just available to most people. So as in, not everyone's going to see Matilda, because it's not, at the time, there was no film version. And so I wanted to pick things that anyone could find online or on TV and watch. So the musicals we picked are musical films. And then I wanted them to be family friendly, so that way you can watch it with your kids. I really liked, some of the musicals, but just, if there are little kids involved, and maybe just more entertaining in that way too. But having a diverse cast was also an important aspect for me. So the great thing about, these days is that there's for instance, we my children had never seen Grease before, the John Travolta version, because, we just didn't watch musicals that much. That I was looking online, I saw there was a Grease live version, and it was, a little more current. And they had actors that Vanessa, oh my goodness, I think it's Vanessa Hudgens. She was Rizzo, And so, so they had more diversity involved. And so I kind of wanted to focus on that and show that. So that was kind of a fun way to select the musicals. And then, and then from there, we selected the recipes after that.
And how did you decide which recipes to connect with which musicals?
Yeah, well, the fun thing is about the recipes, a lot of them are interconnected. So whether it's like the time period or the region. So if it is like a British show, Mary Poppins or Alice in Wonderland, you can kind of interchange them. And so when I was putting the cookbook together, when I was thinking about that, after I got the project, was approved, I was thinking how to format the musical, and it came about that way. Oh, there's actually a lot of overlap. So, and then like I have shows that are like based in like Hawaii, like with Lilo and Stitch, or things that are, the Polynesian islands like Moana. And so those kind of also went along with each other as well. So I found out we could use different recipes for many different things. And so we kind of picked it along those times, or even the time period, for Hamilton, like the hoe cakes were a really popular thing during that time. They weren't mentioned in the musical, but I did use like the time reference for that too. And other things like, like Singing in the Rain is one of my favorite musicals, and it became one of my family's favorite musicals too. They've never seen it until the time we did a project. And, there's a song, Good Morning. And that's like obviously a breakfast song. So that went really well with breakfast food. And that happens to be like, hands down, my family, we just love to eat breakfast. We can have breakfast any time of the day. So those recipes are really fun to make, not just during the musical times, but they're also some of our favorite recipes too. So that's, that was kind of a play on the title of the book, a few of my favorite things, where it's, in reference to musicals, but they also are some of my favorite recipes too that we were able to incorporate into the book.
What is your favorite musical?
It is Singing in the Rain. I just love the joy of that musical, but watching it again with my kids, I was also struck by how funny it is. And I forgot about that. Like, I think her name is Jean Hagen. She plays Lena. And she's hilarious. And I think, she's the villain of the musical, but I feel like she actually really shone in her humor and her delivery, which was pretty impressive for the time, for having like this woman actor just be so hilarious. So she and, oh my goodness, I think his name is Donald O'Connor. He played, Cosmo, another supporting character. And those two together were just hilarious. And my children, and we just loved it. Like they, after we watched it, they were singing like Moses Supposes, by the, like they knew all the words. And I just thought, wow, this is really catchy. And it was really, really fun to introduce that to them, but also to, just have that joy of that film. And just, even though it's like, it deals with like a black and white movie, I felt it was so colorful. And so that's one of my favorite ones.
And Moses Supposes is the showstopper in that film. I mean, that's one that if you're watching it on YouTube, you stop and back it up and watch that again. It's just so amazing.
It is. The dancing, the music, it's just, yeah. And I think like that's the neat thing about musicals. They're not just like a movie you're watching, but they're also an experience, Like I don't think I've ever watched a movie and acted out a scene afterwards. But after a musical, like that song will be in my head. And like, and yeah, there's clips on YouTube. But so I feel like, there is something really, really special about having music in films, and the chance to share that with people around you. It's a shared experience. And those songs, like, they stay with you too.
Veeda Bybee is our guest. We're talking about a few of my favorite things. Her brand new cookbook that features recipes to go with some of her favorite family musicals. Her website is Veeda, Veeda, Bybee, VeedaBybee.com. You write other stuff too, and that is your training. You were actually trained to become a writer. Why write?
Writing is something that is just it's funny because you do it on your own. Like, even if you have an editor or friends, a writing group, it's still your name's on the cover, and it's a very solitary thing, but yet it really brings you together. Like, I think of my favorite authors, I think how connected I feel to them. Like, I feel like they have written something that like I really relate with. Like, there's this book, it's a children's book called One Crazy Summer by Rita Williams Garcia. So it was written in the 90s, but it's about a girl who, and I was born in Oakland, and this book takes place in like 1960 Oakland, way before me. But there are so many things about that book and that character that even though it was very specific to her experience with like civil rights and the Black Panther movement, but she was also the oldest, and I'm the oldest. And I think, as writers, even though we write about things that are specific to ourselves, the more we do that, it's actually more relatable to others too. So I love words and the way it connects us, and especially for children too, and how they can feel maybe seen as we share our own stories and create characters that kind of take them on either on adventures or they can relate to in other ways too. But I love writing, and I hope to always do it.
And you seem to move effortlessly between nonfiction and fiction. I found Shining a Light, celebrating 40 Asian American and Pacific Islanders who changed the world, to be a fascinating and enlightening read. Tell me a little bit about that book and what motivated you to write it.
Thank you very much for mentioning Shining a Light. Yes, I have a undergraduate degree in journalism. So I thought for one point in my time I was going to be a journalist. I love people, I love like interviews and talking to others, but things happen and our interests go different ways. But I think things that have attracted to us before, they're still with us. And so when I was thinking about, I was having a hard time selling my first fiction book. And at the time, my literary agent, she said, nonfiction is doing really well right now. Is there something that you would be interested in doing? This is like during the pandemic as well, actually. And so, and there was, I just thought, there's just not much exposure to Asian Americans, and, and I am one. But the funny thing is, after she asked me that question, the first thing I thought, I was like, well, maybe I'll write something on toilet paper because we are having a toilet paper shortage, And so I could stir 3 different ideas. Toilet paper was one of them. And the biography and nonfiction, Asian American Pacific Islanders was the next one. And obviously the toilet paper one was not mine, but there is a really great nonfiction project out there about toilet paper, and it's really funny. I'm so glad the author did write that. But that was the one that I wrote a proposal, and it's just been one of the books of my heart to go through history and write. It's just like, it's a very short biography about each individual, but I feel like I was interviewing them in a way, and like I loved the opportunity to bring about the spark of them and how the things that they went through, have made the world in small steps, but it's a better place for all of us. And I just love learning about them. And I hope that the schools and libraries and children, they can also see the great things that they accomplished too. Thank you so much for bringing that project up.
What do you think is the appeal of cookbooks? There are hundreds of them out there, probably a dozen or so that are published every year. You've jumped into the middle of that fray with a very good idea. What do you think makes people want to continue to consume that genre?
Well, we all have to eat. And so having recipes and thinking of just different ways, I think it's a creative part too. Like I have no formal training in cooking, but I did actually want to do years and years ago, before I even wanted to become a writer of fiction and books. I wanted to have I had a food blog online, and it was really hard though, and so I ended up kind of letting it go. But it's interesting how things come back to you. So, anyways, but I think that cookbooks, they're not just, for me, they're not just recipes. I love reading the head notes. I love reading the author's voice and just how they selected that recipe too. And so I feel like it's not just a collection of just recipes, but it's also like a journey of sorts too. And so I like to read cookbooks just in my bed before I go to sleep too, just like I would a novel, and so I'll go through and I'll flip, and reading about baking is my favorite thing to do too. Just like how did this person come up with this cookie recipe or this cake? So I think it's really relaxing, and it fuels a creative part for me that I think it also fuels for others too.
Was time in the kitchen important in your life as you were growing up?
Yes. Kitchen time was really important. That it's a time where I spent with my mom. She would show us how to do things. I was never really that great of a cook though. So I was really frustrated because I love baking. So we have like this 1980s Betty Crocker. It's an orange. I have our family copy. And I would just read that book and like, I just thought like, oh, the baking section was my favorite. It showed how to like make a cat or make a cake into a cat. And I was really frustrated because my cookies would never turn out. And it wasn't until I was in college where I realized, I grew up with margarine and like, those sticks of margarine, we never had real butter in my house. And so every time I made the cookies, they would never rise. They didn't have the fat content of the butter. And so one of my roommates one day we were grocery shopping and she asked me to pass her, give her some butter. I handed her just the margarine because I just thought, oh, this is butter. It's the cheapest. And she gave me a lesson right then of like what butter is and like why we had it. So it totally changed my life. And I'd become a much better baker, realizing like, oh, I've been baking with margarine this whole time. So yeah, it's all these lessons in the kitchen that I've learned throughout the years.
A lot of us who write find it tough to jump between styles and genres, but you seem to easily navigate a short story as well as you do the longer novel length fiction and nonfiction that you create. What's the difference and what's the hardest thing to write?
For me, the hardest thing to write is our novels. I have a journalism background, so I'm really used to, I was trained in just writing really short and like, I'm really good short form. So your strengths can be your weaknesses. So to write something longer, like having to describe a scene and to really get into the emotion of a character, that's harder for me to do because I can do something a lot shorter. So those shorter projects are fairly fun and they're easier thing for me to do than a longer thing. So I feel like having the short stories is really nice because it's just like, okay, all you have to write just one scene. It doesn't have to be that layered in depth. But novels, they tend to be, they're just they're longer. So having to stick with a project that longer, that's harder for me to do. But I have a goal. I'm working on those. So children's books too, the ones I've primarily done are not as long, but like I hope to write an adult book one day. But I know that's going to be harder because it's a lot more words.
Veeda Bybee is our guest. Veeda, BYBEE.com is her website. And her newest book is a cookbook, A Few of My Favorite Things. And of course, we remember that so well from The Sound of Music. Is that your favorite song from The Sound of Music? Favorite things?
I think it is. I also love the Do Re Mi, the scene where all the kids are lined up and singing. I love that, just having children to be seen in that movie and having that be such an important thing. So it's probably a toss up between those two. But I love the theme of a few of my favorite things where she's singing it to them when they're kind of scared, or you're thinking about your favorite things and everything is better. And I think that is such a great theme about the movie of The Sound of Music, but also just a good thing in life, like we're going to have scary times like thunderstorms and things like that. But we also have really good ones that can be like brown paper packages tied up with strings. And as we remember those things, life isn't so bad. And we can remember that next favorite time is just right around the corner too.
How did you know when the book was ready for publication?
Well, I sold the cookbook under a proposal. And that's a nonfiction. And so, that's how that works. I knew it was ready for publication after the editor was like, okay, we're ready to go. So, that's, I didn't have to write the whole thing and pitch it, which was really nice. And even now, like, I think, it's the final product, but you can always go back and want to change things, but it's as good as it's going to be. And so it's good as it's going to be at this time. And so I've learned as an author to really let go of that perfection tendency that I think sometimes so many of us can have, where we feel like, oh, I don't want to send this query out yet, or it's not ready to go out yet because and maybe sometimes it's not, but sometimes it is. And so it's like, knowing that intuition of just gotta let it go because it's going to be as good as it's going to be right now. And if you work it on longer, sometimes it ends up being more detrimental. You can use to over edit. And I think even with the cookbook too, I just had to be like, okay, the recipes are what they are. The photos are what they are. It's just it's good. It's gone over. We've gone through a couple of edits on it now, so I make my deadlines and then it's good to go.
What's been the early reaction from people who have seen advanced copies of a few of my favorite things?
I've been really happy about the reception of the cookbook. I've had a lot of great responses about how beautiful and the colors are just so bright. And one of my and I also don't know the recipes people are going to try at first. In my mind, I think they're going to probably try this one. But I've been kind of surprised to hear someone's tried one of the harder recipes. Someone made the shepherd's pie, which requires making mashed potatoes and then also making the other part. But then I got a message from a friend, and he had the boat snack Loco Moco, and he said it brought him back to Hawaii. Because he was there for a couple of years, and it was like a Ratatouille moment for me, like in the movie Ratatouille, where the food critic is at the restaurant and he eats the ratatouille and brings him back to childhood. And I think that's what food can do for us. It brings us back to a moment. And so that was the greatest compliment. That recipe and the cookbook brought, this individual back to Hawaii. And it made me feel really happy to know that, one, that it turned out fine and it was good, but two, that it helped him remember this memory that meant so much to him.
What is your favorite recipe from the cookbook?
It's one of the more complicated ones. It's the baked Alaska. And I think it's my favorite because I to this day, I've never had a baked Alaska except for the one in my own home. It's not something that I see on menus. When I was younger, I watched Annie, and my mom for some reason, she really wanted me to try out for Annie. Well, I don't really sing that well. And I don't remember if I actually did it. It was for our community play, but it was just this funny thing where we watched a lot of Annie and she was just really into it. So this baked Alaska, it reminds me of her because she would also, spent a lot of time making ice cream cakes for us, because back then I was a kid in the 80s and Baskin Robbins cakes, ice cream cakes were very popular, and they were the things that all the kids had at their birthday parties, but we just couldn't afford one. They're also kind of expensive. So my mom would take the square, a quart of ice cream or whatever the size is, and she would make ice cream cakes for us. So the baked Alaska for me, as I was going through the book, it's an ice cream cake. So what it is, it's a chocolate, or it's just a cake. There's a circular cake and there's a dome shape of ice cream on top of the cake. And then it's covered in Italian meringue, and you torch it. And so it looks really pretty. It's like a marshmallow. So the frosting is like a marshmallow. So it is pretty time intensive because you have to freeze ice cream into a bowl and then put it on top of a cake you made and then make the meringue. But for me, it's also it takes me back to my ice cream cakes that my mom would make us, not that time intensive or fancy, but just that musical and that memory of that cake is pretty meaningful to me. And I hope someone makes the baked Alaska, and I want to know, how it turns out. It is, yeah. Again, it's more time intensive, so I understand. But I also do wonder too, I think it tastes really good. But I wonder, does it taste like a baked Alaska? Because I've never actually had one outside my own home too. So,
the book is A Few of My Favorite Things. It was written by our special guest, Veeda Bybee, VEEDA. BYBEE.com is the website. It launches January 7th from Shadow Mountain, a one-of-a-kind cookbook that celebrates great recipes tied to great musicals. Veeda, this has been great. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This has been so fun to get to know you too and to talk. And you have such great questions.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.